All right. So here we are. Richard Citrin, welcome to She Talks Business. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm honored to be here. I've listened to your podcast for a long time and so proud of what you're doing and love to be a part of it.
Well, I can't wait to dive into this conversation because I think that our listeners can learn a lot from you, especially on the topic that I really want to explore with you, which is the topic of resilience. So,
Mm.
the first question that I have for you is why do you think resilience is an important skill for business owners?
Well, I might say the question a little bit differently in the sense that I like to think that resilience is hardwired into us.
Mhm.
So, when people say to me, well, how do I develop resilience? I remind them that there's no developing of resilience. It is part of our human nature. It's that ability to get back up after we've been knocked down. It's the ability to keep plugging ahead. The ability to kick in the grit. All of those things are hardwired into us. So the question really becomes how can we strengthen our resilience?
Mhm.
And the question about business owners and women business owners is that business is tough.
Mhm.
And so you want to have that attitude of persistence, perseverance, uh, taking on challenges and seeing them as opportunities, and having the right mental mindset that is so essential to being a business owner. And I remember when we owned our business, and it was very difficult and challenging time. And Sheila and I co-own this business. My wife Sheila and I used to co-own the business, and we get home at the end of the day, which was often 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and we grab a quick bite to eat, and then we'd hop in our hot tub, which is where we would talk business. And so, part of our resilience strategy then was to also have some downtime and to learn to relax. And it's hard to find in the hot tub. The worst thing you do is splash other people in there. So it was a great tool, and that's why I think it's essential for business owners to own that quality and to strengthen it in their own work and life.
I feel like the word resilience is such a, I don't know, a hard word to pin down because what does it really mean to be resilient? You say we're all built, like we all have resilience, but yet there are a lot of people that get caught up in the day-to-day things that go wrong. And I mean, there are some people that have some really legitimate reasons that life is down and out, but then there are some people that just seem to be derailed by the smallest things. And so if we just start by talking about some small things, like maybe you have a customer who's unhappy about something. How do you learn to practice being resilient with some of those small things and not letting them derail you or affect your mood or affect the way you communicate with people so that you are building that muscle for when the really big things happen?
Sure. So, let me, another place maybe that I'll start is to talk about my definition of resilience. So, resilience for most people, it comes out of, a physics standpoint, an engineering standpoint, an environmental standpoint, and a psychological standpoint. And it typically means our ability to return to a previous state of existence. As I began to study resilience, and both personally and professionally, I realized that resilience is much more than that. And so I have more of an expanded definition of resilience that talks about how we can use it over time to really address stress, which is what resilience is about and what you're describing. So my definition of resilience is our ability to effectively plan for, navigate successfully in real time, and bounce forward from challenging and difficult events in such a way that we learn and grow from them. So there's kind of four components. So the first one is this kind of our ability to plan and prepare for
Mhm.
an event that's going to happen. We don't always know that an angry customer is going to come in, and we still might prep our staff on how to deal with an upset customer when they come in, so that they have some vaccination, if you will, in strength and ideas on how to deal with a difficult situation. the navigating in real time is always the challenging part because that's when the stress reaction is happening, and that's the
Yeah.
example that you
That's
used.
the trigger.
That's the trigger, and we could talk about some tools, really, what we're wanting to get for people to deal with that. And I've got some amazing tools that I've shared with people over the years. Some very simple and straightforward as well. Most of them are. And the third part is bouncing forward. So usually, again, it's bouncing back, but we want it to be something that enhances where we're going, particularly in business. A lot of businesses during the pandemic had to make adjustments to how they were being run and operated. Some of them kind of became smaller so they could focus on infrastructure development. Others obviously developed online capabilities, so they had new tasks and new challenges and new ways to deal with their customers. And others didn't respond. And
Hmm.
those were the ones that had trouble because they weren't able, they were just trying to get back to where they were instead of thinking about how they could get ahead. And the last part of the formula of the definition is really about growing and learning from that experience, so that we walk away saying, "Hey, here's what I've learned. This is what I've gathered. This is the new information that I can use in future situations." And that's what strengthens the resilience, is going through these difficult situations and owning it, being able to
Hmm.
say, heck, I did that. I really have more capability than perhaps I thought I did. And that's so great for our self-esteem, our confidence, and knowing that we
Hmm.
can handle these difficult kinds of things. That seems to be happening more and more in
Hmm.
work and in life. It's just everything's moving so quickly.
So what I'm hearing you say is, if you can anticipate the things that maybe take you out. So if you know, for example, that an upset customer is going to derail your day, for example, or an employee who makes a mistake is going to derail your day, what you really want to do is you want to sit and think about how you deal with that, how, like, a formula or a framework, a way that you can approach it so that you don't react so emotionally. And then when you know how you're going to deal with it in the moment, the situation isn't so it's not so hot, meaning you're not volatile, you're not as upset about it because you've already thought in your mind, okay, I know that these things happen, this is what I'm going to do. So now you actually feel better about how you've responded, and so therefore you're actually strengthening your resilience because you've identified, hey, I recognize that when I have an upset customer, it really throws me off. And then I end up being a terrible leader to my team because I take it personally and I get upset. And the fallout of this upset customer is often worse than what the customer was upset about. So
Absolutely.
recognizing that is probably the very first step, recognizing what are those things.
That's right. And recognizing what the triggers are. I think the preparation phase, though, also has an aspect to it that I refer to as building hardiness.
Hmm.
Hardiness is a little bit like part of the reason we work out at the gym, right?
Hmm.
So we work out at the gym because we want to get stronger so that we're able to, deal with any physical infirmities as well as, just having a better clarity on our mental health. That builds
Right.
our strength. Eating well does that, getting sleep, all of these things build our hardiness, prepare us for more adversity and difficulty. In the business setting, and I mentioned this a moment ago, something that a business owner will want to do with her team, where particularly they're dealing with customers, is at your team meeting, to talk about, let's share about who had the toughest customer this week. What'd you
Hmm.
do with that person? Let's role play what happened, and let's come up with two or three different scenarios that the team can use in dealing with a situation. So, the first one is we're going
Hmm.
to listen attentively. We're going to maybe reflect back what I heard you say. Customer is this. We're going to, see what we can do to remedy the situation within our ability, our business ability. Then we may consider, well, we could go outside and offer this, gift card. And after that, it's going to be, I'm sorry, ma'am, there's really nothing else we can do. I'm sorry that we've disappointed you.
Right.
So you give people those kinds of skills and practice in doing that. And then when the situation comes up, they have a familiarity and immunization, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to that situation, that just makes it a little, it's never going to be easy. If customers are yelling at you or they're upset, nobody's happy about that situation. So it's not going to be well, it could be a great outcome,
Yeah.
but it's going to
Yeah.
be a challenging one.
It's interesting, when I think about the things that um, where I need to strengthen my own resilience inside of my business related to customers, I take things a lot more personally in my own business than I ever did when I worked for somebody else's business. And so if I think back to when I worked for, when I worked in corporate or I worked in retail, like in the wireless industry, you expected people to come in and be really, really, really hot-headed and upset about things. And you knew how to diffuse the situation and you didn't take it personally.
Right.
But when it's your own business, sometimes it's hard not to take it personally. And so I think, maybe reframing that this happens, you have things like this that happen in every business, and these are the things that you can do to, make it better. I think that's a really wise place.
Hmm.
So can you give me any other examples of how you strengthen resilience? Like, I love the example of going to the gym and being hardy. I love what you just talked about in terms of, the steps and all of that kind of stuff. Um, but what about, is there anything else that you can think
Yeah.
of?
Yeah. So there's a whole, bunch of toolkits that actually are available on my website under the resilience resource page that I make available to people. And
Hmm.
I have something that I call the cheat sheet, which is a big 11 by 14 sheet that I jokingly say has everything on one page that I know about resilience. So there's plenty of tips on there, and I certainly invite people to go to my website, which was
Hmm.
designed, I might add, by Lisa Larter's group, richardcitrin.com. And so if we think about those three areas, preparation, navigation, and bounce forward, what are the kind of tools that people can use? And in fact, on the website, I have an assessment that
Hmm.
people can take that helps them see whether they need help in preparation, need help in navigation, need help in bouncing forward in those three categories. So we talked a little bit about preparation, which is really around planning and building hardiness. So
Hmm.
some of that is the preparation piece. So, that's as simple as what's my week going to be on Sunday,
Hmm.
looking at that, or talking about what your day is going to be and what you want to achieve and how do you bring in, a current amount of work that you can get done. I was talking to one of my clients is a professor, a physics professor who's working on a big National Science Foundation grant. It's his main revenue generation, and it's due next week. And he says, listen, I'm crazy. He said, I'm overwhelmed. This is a big deal, and it's really the future of our center, and also 8 other centers that we're working with. So
Hmm.
it's a really, really big deal, and it's just a very, very crazy time. And I said, how's it been previous times when you've done this? He said, it's exactly the same. I said, and how do you usually do? He said, I have prepared for this. I have all the information. It's just the actual doing of it is just so intense that I'm going to be working all weekend, every day. And then next Wednesday, next Thursday, I'll be done. And then I can take a couple of days off and have some downtime. And so there was something about him recognizing that this is just a very crazy time for
Hmm.
him and not fighting it, not being
Right.
upset about it. This is what he signed up for.
Yeah.
He's doing big time science, and that's what's involved in doing big time. This guy has a global reputation. He travels all
Hmm.
over the world speaking. So, that's what he loves. That's what he does, and this is part of the. I think he'd probably prefer if somebody just gave him the money, but that's not the way it works.
I like what you said about I signed up for this. I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we signed up for these things.
That's
And
right.
when you're a business owner, you signed up to be a business owner. And that doesn't mean that you get to sit at a desk and eat bonbons and watch, entertaining videos all day. There's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. And you, as the leader of your organization, need to master being resilient if you want to be a good leader to your team. Because if you can't master your own emotional reactions to things and you can't strengthen your own resilience, then you're probably going to create a toxic work culture.
You are so right about that, Lisa. People look to you as the leader for setting the tone, for building the camaraderie and spirit.
Hmm.
It's okay for people to see that things are tough.
Right.
It's okay to say, listen, this is a challenging time. My professor client, has a team that's working with him, and he goes to them. He says, "Listen, thank you for the effort you're putting in. I appreciate it. I know this is a very tough time. It'll be over next week. Let's just keep our nose to it and keep going." And people so appreciate
Hmm.
that. When we ran our healthcare business, every Christmas I would send at least every Christmas I would write a personal note to everybody, thanking them for their work and kind of including what they had accomplished during the year. And so many people came up to me and said, I'd never had a boss who came to me and thanked me for my work. I so appreciate that. It was such a
Hmm.
small thing to do. It's a little thing that business owners and leaders can do is to, just write a personal hand note to different employees every month.
Yeah.
Takes you 5 minutes, and people they'll put it on their wall. They're
Yeah.
proud of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I know. I do that all the time. I have a box of custom stationery, and I probably take a dozen cards to the mailbox on a weekly basis.
Yeah,
And it's an old fashioned way of acknowledging people, and it just means so much to them because nobody does it anymore. I
exactly,
love that.
exactly. So that actually is a building hardiness strategy
Hmm.
that you're doing. It's
How
also
s- how so? Because I'm helping them to I'm building their hardiness by showing them what I see in them, like
exactly.
acknowledging them for their strengths.
I also have done a lot of work in leadership development, and
Hmm.
part of what we emphasize in our leadership development work is helping people to see the particular skills, strengths, and competencies that they've used for success in their work. So a comment from a manager or a boss or a business owner to an employee that says, I really appreciated how you handled that client last week who was upset. What I really appreciate about it was the patience that you showed in listening to her concerns and then looking at three or four different solutions to help her resolve her issues so that she was satisfied when she left.
Hmm.
So it's not, and this comes from research that's been done around the growth mindset that you may be familiar with.
Hmm.
The growth,
Carol Dweck.
Carol, yeah, that's right. Which is that, and she did it, of course, with children, with school age children, which is that it's great to say to them, "Hey, I'm really proud that you got an A on your test," and it's even more effective to say, "I'm really proud that you got the A on the test, and what I really appreciate and I'm proud of you for is that you sat down with your brother and asked him to drill you on those language cards."
Yeah.
Identifying the specific behavior is what we need to do to help people recognize and own the skills that we're wanting them to demonstrate. That
Yeah.
builds resilience because now people have not only the skill, but the confidence to know that they have the skill.
Exactly.
And that's
Exactly.
important.
Years ago, I went to some type of a leadership course, and I was with my old boss, Jackie Fu, and they had us sitting in a circle, and we had to write down on a piece of paper all of the skills that we were really good at. And so I start writing all this stuff down, and all of a sudden I felt like everybody in the room was looking at me. And I looked up and I looked around the room, and there were all these other people sitting there with blank pieces of paper. And I realized in that moment what a gift my boss was to me, because I knew what I was really good at because she told me all the time. And she was specific about the things that she told me. And so I think you're 100% right. It's such an important thing from a leadership
Yes.
perspective.
And people, they just can use that information.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how you talk a lot about using adversity for success. And so, my question for you is, how do you adopt a mindset that allows you to use adversity for success? What are some ways that people can do that?
Well, that kind of brings us to the second part of the resilience definition, that ability to navigate through difficult times. And when we're facing adversity, that's really when we're in the middle of that challenging period that can throw us off so easily.
Mhm.
And I think by 2024 word of the year, Lisa, is equanimity, which is a word that I've known for a long time, but I've begun to study more over the last year or so. And equanimity is our ability to maintain our balance and
Mhm.
focus in the midst of a difficult experience, really when we're almost in the middle of it. And I first, I think, ran across the word when I was reading about a fellow who was in a plane crash who had been studying meditation and mindfulness for 20 years. And when the plane went down and there were people died and there were survivors, he found himself in a very equanimitous position where he was able to recognize the dangers that were involved, but was also able to keep his wits about him, if you will,
Mhm.
and wound up being a hero in that on that day in how many people he helped get out of the plane and keep the level of panic and fear to a I guess workable level, at least among
Right.
himself and among other people. And so I think this, and I've been using this with my clients more and more, has been sharing and teaching them about equanimity and how to have that perception so that it diminishes the intensity of what we're viewing the adversity of being. Sort of if he could do it for a plane crash, whatever it is we're dealing with is going to be a lot easier.
Mhm.
And that brings us to this notion of meditation and mindset and mindfulness, this ability to really be present in the moment. And when I talk to people about meditation and mindfulness, I point out to them that this is not, I mean, it may have a religious connotation. In fact, it does. I mean, that's what prayer is. And whether it's meditation in an Eastern or Western mode, people attribute a religious or spiritual component to it, and it can have that. And it also doesn't have to have that. So when you're out walking in nature,
Mhm.
you're being meditative. When you're enjoying your flowers, we have fresh flowers at our house every week, and I took a few minutes to kind of arrange these flowers before our session today, and I found those 2 minutes of my cutting and trimming and putting those that rose at Astromedia in my little planter there to be quieting, to be
Mhm.
calming for me. It's something that I enjoy doing. And so finding these opportunities in our day to be quiet, to be focused, and it could again be a formal meditation or mindful practice that you have, but to recognize again that this is kind of a birthright, this ability to quiet our mind and to be able to develop a focus on a breathing or on a single point. And what that does is it begins to open up some of these pathways for a little
Mhm.
more clarity that can help us to deal with the adversity, whatever it may be. And, it's like the professor I talked about earlier. His adversity was getting this grant done. And, what was his approach? As you pointed out, I signed up for this. So let me go ahead and take that. So, what's your mantra for dealing with adversity? We've had some difficult ones in our family, and one of the we as we've lost a couple of adult children, one to
Mhm.
AIDS, one to cancer. So one of our mantras for when adversity strikes is, well, it's not cancer,
Right.
and it gives it's whatever it is that we're dealing with, it's not as bad as that. So that gives us some perspective, and how do we gain that kind of perspective? I think I find that to be a useful tool in
Yeah.
dealing with adversity.
Um, I'm going to come back to the adversity that you have had in your life because I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. But before I ask you about that, uh, you say on your website, uh, get 1% better every day, and in 70 days, you'll be twice as good as you are today. My question for you is like, to me, that's a metaphor. I hear people say things like that. And what I really want to know is, how can we make and measure a 1% improvement daily? Like, what are things that people can do so they actually feel like they're getting 1% better? Because I feel like sometimes we think it's all or nothing. And so, do you have any guidance on what are those little 1% incremental moves that we can make for growth?
Sure. Yeah. And we talk about this in our strategy-driven leadership book. It all begins with identifying what it is that you're wanting to improve upon. And so, if it's, increasing our sales, what are the key components around building a sales pipeline?
Mhm.
If it's around, being a better executor and making sure that you have flawless execution with your clients, what's the, what are the associated steps for doing that? One of the things that I would say is one of my, more personal objectives that I've been working on for the past several years has been about being happier, just being happier in my day. And so one of the things that often happens for me when I go for a walk first thing in the morning, it's a group of folks that go out and walk dogs, so I join in on that. And when I see somebody's newspaper that got delivered, I throw it up on the steps. Now, that's a pretty small thing, takes very little energy. Yet I say to myself, that person's going to come out of their door this morning and they're going to smile because somebody was kind enough to throw the paper up to their door. And that was me.
Mhm.
And so I already did something that helped someone this morning. And for me, helping someone is really a source of, I'm a psychologist by training and in my heart. And so for me, it's all about helping people. How can I help them improve? And if, if I have a day where I haven't helped somebody, not a really good day for me. So I've got to do something to make sure that happens. So, what's the goal that you're wanting to achieve? And how can, it's the other thing about leadership and leadership development that I like to talk about. I have so many clients who, in their businesses, this is large and small, they don't provide the regular kind of feedback to their employees that they need. They do it, the big companies, they do it annually or semi-annually. In small companies, there's often little time for doing it because there's so much work to be done.
Mhm.
And what I like to point out is that the opportunities for growth and development happen every day. You don't have to set aside, now we're going to talk about learning, we're not good, now we're going to talk about development. These
Mhm.
opportunities happen every day. So you may not have an irate customer every day, and you're probably going to have some kind of new customer challenge every day of one kind or another. Or maybe it's a situation where the team is really overloaded with work. So
Mhm.
how do we use that adversity as an opportunity to learn about prioritization, or learn about saying no, or learn about helping somebody else to get their work done because it's more critical than your work that's being done. Hey Lisa, I'll jump on that with her because I think it's really important that we get back to this client, and I'll do my work. My work can wait a day or two to get done.
Mhm.
These kinds of opportunities happen every day in the workplace, they happen every day in life. And if we can use these opportunities, that's how we grow 1% every day because we're doing something to improve ourselves. If we don't have that notion of improvement, of learning, I use an assessment with many of my clients called Strength Finders that was developed
Mhm.
by Gallup and
Mhm.
it's the most widely used workplace assessment of all. And the strengths that are identified there, to me, the most important one is learner.
Mhm.
Because if you're a learner, you could pretty much learn the other 33 strengths.
Mhm.
But if you
One
don't
of my
have,
top 5 is learner.
excuse me, yeah, there you go. So if you don't, if you're
And one
not,
of my other top 5 is responsibility, which is a bit of a pain in the butt because it can mean that I'm overly responsible to others and not responsible enough to myself.
responsibility is it's a great standalone uh, strength. I tell people it's within this executing profile or factor. And strength, responsibility is the person who takes psychological ownership of something. So that's what a business owner does.
Mhm.
And so if people aren't doing what they're needing to get done, then you're going to jump in because
Right.
And I
And
suspect
that's
that
why I take things personally because I
that's
feel
why you take,
responsible.
you know what, I don't think there's anything wrong with that for a business owner to take things personally and to take it to heart.
Hmm.
Because most business owners are going to have that, that awareness and sensitivity. I might add too, because I know this podcast is She Talks Business, and a lot of your listeners are women business owners. I think women particularly are so adept at that capacity for really understanding their clients, being customer responsive. Any strength that's taken to excess becomes a problem and is actually the biggest
Hmm.
issue for most successful leaders. It's not lacking a strength, it's overusing a strength. And so if you
Hmm.
have a strength that you become reliant on, like responsibility or empathy, and you get caught into those things, then that could be a little bit damaging because you may not be, I don't want to say damaging, they're not
Yeah.
as effective as other strengths are. So you look at that and you say, so if you take on too much responsibility and psychological ownership, the remedy for that is to strengthen your delegation and accountability, holding people accountable as a new skill to develop.
Right. That's
That would
great.
be
It's a
that
great
would be
idea
the way you,
recommendation.
yeah, because what people will say is, well, I have to stop being less responsible. You don't want that. What you want to do is develop a new skill. So the new skill is I'm going to learn to delegate this particular, I'm going to delegate the quality assurance program to one of my staff members. She's going to be responsible
Hmm.
for checking everybody else's work, and then I'll check the work after that. And we help her to develop her QI skills,
Hmm.
and then she takes that on and even if she takes 20 or 30% of that burden off of you, that gives you a little space to breathe.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. So we've all have we've all had challenges, and you mentioned that you and your wife have lost two adult children, and I don't think I can tell you that um, in my 40s, my mom would still try to hold me back from crossing the street because she didn't want to get hit by a car. So I
Right.
don't think that the loss of a child is I think the loss of a child is one of the hardest things that anybody can go through, regardless of how old they are. And so, one of the reasons that I respect your work on resilience so much is because you are not somebody who just talks about it. You're somebody who has walked through that path and walked through it in a way that most people hope they never ever have to experience. And so, um, I'm wondering for people who are listening right now, they're not dealing with cancer, they're not dealing with AIDS, maybe they are dealing with the loss of a loved one. But when life feels insurmountable, what what advice do you offer them to do more than just survive? Where do they start? Can you give us some guidance on, because obviously you don't just roll out of bed the next day and be like, okay, I'm resilient today. Like there's a grieving process, there's a dealing process. And I'm just wondering if you can, like I said before, the customer yelling at me, that's not that's not a life or death situation.
Mm.
I can let it take me out for the day, but I'll probably be okay the next day. But there are some real issues that people are dealing with. And if we look at what's going on in the world today, um, the economy,
Yeah,
inflation, people are living paycheck to paycheck. People are scared they're going to lose homes. There's instability politically. There's wars going on. There's um, you know
protests.
protests. There's all this stuff going on, and depending on how empathetic you are, some
Right,
of this stuff can really feel a lot harder to one person than it does to another. And so
right,
I'm just wondering if you can give people some practical advice on how to do more than just feel like they're surviving.
sure. Well, you had a guest on recently who was a trauma therapist,
Hmm.
and she talked about trauma, and there's, I think we
Annie.
come to so much. Yeah, you said she was your favorite psychotherapist, and I don't know. I had a psychotherapy background too, Lisa, and And by the way,
Every guest is my favorite when they're on the show, Richard. You're my favorite psychologist today and my favorite resilience expert.
and Annie spoke about resilience very well last week as well, I would say. Um, first of all, I think survival is okay in some situations. I think if you're just at that point where you're hanging on to something, I think that could be an okay place to start
Hmm.
because it's the recognition that you are surviving, and that is such a critical aspect of what resilience is. It begins with that sense of surviving. And I like to tell people that the original research on resilience was done in Hawaii in the 50s, where a researcher very cleverly tracked the path of children who were orphaned in
Hmm.
Hawaii. And she was able to track the path of children who were adopted and grew up in a home with two loving parents versus homes where children were not in a loving situation or were not adopted.
Hmm.
And what she found was that obviously the children who were in a safe environment did much better
Hmm.
over their lifetime than the children that weren't. And that overall, about a third of the children had high resilient capabilities. That this resilience, while we all have it, was stronger in about a third of the children than others. So there's probably something around the fact that a third of us have really good resilience, a third have moderately good resilience, and a third of us have poor resilience.
Mm. So recognizing what bucket you're in the beginning.
Recognizing the bucket you're in is really important. The
Hmm.
kinds of big picture things about resilience, of course, is support, getting being in a community. And I would say, in both situations with Ken, who was he was a gay, obviously a gay man. He passed of AIDS. His gay community was unbelievable,
Hmm.
loving and supportive to him, loving and supportive to Sheila and I. I mean, we would, Ken had an apartment. We would go over there to help care for him, and his friends would, sometimes chase us away and say, "Hey, we got it.
Hmm.
We'll help. We'll take care of him. Don't worry about it. You guys could have the day off." With Corrine, our daughter, who passed away 5 years later from breast cancer, her community of friends was unbelievable. In fact, they when she came home from the hospital one Christmas, they had completely decorated the house. And we had an old piano that she used because her children played and she played, and her friends fundraised to get her a baby grand piano in the house.
Oh, wow.
It was just unbelievable. Again, community of people. So don't isolate, don't do
Hmm.
things on your own. That's really the most important part. I think, seeking professional care, and in your conversation with Annie last week, it came up about, getting therapy. And, I think today, thank God, mental health, and you talked about that in your session with her. Mental health has become much more open. And I've
Hmm.
been in this field for 40 years, and there's still a stigma. We
Hmm.
still say, oh, they're nuts or whatever. And it's better than it ever was.
Hmm.
So, reaching out and helping. And I would share the story that when we moved, so we lived in Fort Worth, Texas, and that's when Corrine passed. She was down at MD Anderson Hospital, and we were supporting her there. And when she died, we decided soon after to leave Texas and to move up here to a new place to kind of start over again.
Hmm.
And what I found was that when I was doing professional presentations, Lisa, or when I was prepping for professional presentations, and I'd start to talk about Korean, I started crying.
Hmm.
And our coach and mentor, Alan Weiss, said to me, I don't think that's really going to be the right angle that you want to take for doing presentations about resilience. And so for me, there was a therapeutic program offered at the University of Pittsburgh around complicated grief, which is what this was. Grief that lasts more than a year at a certain level of intensity and has multiple episodes to it is considered complicated grief. So I went through a year-long, psychotherapy program around addressing the complicated grief, and it became, much easier and more comfortable for me to talk about Corrine you know, proudly as I want to,
Hmm.
without breaking down, which I didn't want to.
Hmm.
I'll have my moments, but I don't have to do that in front of the world.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I think seeking professional help is another step to do. And I always say to people, if you want to know what the silver bullet of resilience is, I knew you were going to ask me that question. The silver bullet is really around this idea of mindset, which
Hmm.
that, I do have resilience built in. I have dealt with adversity and challenges, maybe not as bad as this one, but everybody has their difficulty. I mean,
Hmm.
again, Annie talked about people who have been abused, women who have been abused. I'm on the board of the Women's Center and Shelter here in town, and we talk about abused women every month. It's not an easy topic to talk about, but it's not going
Hmm.
to go away if we don't talk about it.
Right.
The same thing with gun violence and the protests and the wars. All of these things are things we're not happy with, and so there's a way in which we want to think about what we can do and what we can get done and what we can't get done.
Hmm.
And I think that's the silver bullet there is around what's the right mindset for me to have. And sometimes I don't want to read the newspaper or watch the
Yeah.
news or check my Google News feed. I just want to do that. In fact, my brother turned me on to a newsletter called Nice News that comes every morning to my
It's good
mailbox that
news.
talks about
Sounds
good
good.
stuff. So I think that's a good strategy for dealing with adversity is start your day off with
Hmm.
something positive, send it out to some friends and get feedback from other people. So I think three ideas
Hmm.
leaned for helping people deal with adversity and also I think for leaders, it's important because you can set the tone. One of my clients was Philips Respironics, Philips here in Pittsburgh, who built CPAP machines,
Hmm.
part of Philips Global out of the Netherlands. They do your toothbrushes, but they also
Hmm.
make ventilators and respiratory programs, devices. And it was discovered that a piece of the foam abatement, the sound abatement in one of their machines broke off and could cause potentially cancer.
Hmm.
Company was reduced, by 80% probably of staff members. And I worked with that group for 2 years, helping people, not only strategize how to kind of rebuild the business, but also how to deal with their grief, how to deal with
Hmm.
their pain, how to be resilient, how to not give up on
Yeah.
the company because people wanted to leave. They just settled, so now that's behind them, but the company's been really decimated, and a lot of people have been hurt, and so I worked with that organization to help them learn ways to deal with that tragedy a little more effectively because it affected employees, but of course they were very concerned about their customers that were
Hmm.
potentially harmed, certainly emotionally as well as maybe physically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, on that note, it's important for us as leaders of businesses to also just consider and recognize what some of your team members are going through and dealing with. You don't always know what's going on in someone else's life. And, I want to thank you for sharing your very personal story with us. I know it's not always, it probably isn't always easy to talk about. Uh, I think it's one of the things that differentiates you, and that's why I asked you about it because
Sure.
I feel like I know people who have lost children, and I know that one of the things that they have told me is that no one gets it unless you're a parent who has gone through the same thing. And so I think it's an important thing for people to know about you, especially with the work that you do, because it's like a beacon that can really help other people. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it.
So on that note, your wife has a new book coming out.
She
I'd
does.
love for you to tell us about that book because I think it could be valuable for our listeners as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned about my path towards grieving. My wife Sheila, who I am so proud of, was a university professor, is a social worker, was a professional dancer who danced in movies and in Broadway shows. So she has she is a dancer in her soul. And what she has done, she's written a book about her work with Corinne and Ken called Warrior Mother that she wrote about 6 years ago that tells that story. And what her latest work is, if I may hold the book up, is called The
Yeah.
Art of Grieving, how the arts and art making help us grieve and live our best lives now, Sheila K. Collins.
We will
And
put the link to the book in the show notes.
thank you. And what Sheila has done here is something really interesting. You notice there's a spiral there.
Hmm.
And Sheila has, in her research, professionally and personally, has identified that it's really not the stage theory of grief that people are so popular with using, denial, anger, Kubler-Ross's work, which was really intended to track how the dying die, not how the grieving grieve. That instead it's really more of a spiral that people experience because these events occur again and again in our
Hmm.
lives through holidays that return,
Hmm.
birthdays that return, images we may see,
Hmm.
any kind of traumatic event that can bring back the memory of these events happening. Um, you know, on May 5th, which is Corinne's birthday, her son always puts a long, beautiful post in Facebook about his mom. Pictures of him as a kid, stories about her that inspires him and continues to inspire him. And they always leave me crying every year because they're
Hmm.
so powerful. So I just love, I call Ethan and I tell him how proud of him we are and thank him for doing that to keep his mother's memory alive. And that's a spiral. It
Right.
happens every year. The other piece that Sheila's done in this book that I think is so powerful is that she talks about the use of the arts in helping us to grieve. This really came to the forefront for me one day when I attended the funeral of a friend of mine whose husband passed away at a young age from a heart attack. When I went into the church, I noticed that Alex's pictures were on the table, were projected on the walls. The organ player was playing when we entered the sanctuary. As the service began, the several members of the choir sang a cappella. The minister, in her speaking, shared several biblical poems, all about Alex. The people who told stories, the eulogizers, the stories, as always happens in these situations, brought us to tears and laughter. All art,
Mm.
music, images, storytelling, poetry. I would share with you that at Ken's funeral, our son's funeral, Sheila danced for Ken, for Ken's
Wow.
memory. So she brought in the arts. And so she talks in the book about how we can use the arts in an intentional way to help us learn how to grieve more effectively. And somewhere in there, there's a asterisk that says no art skills required.
Mm.
So you don't have to be a dancer, you don't have to be a painter, you don't have to be a singer to use these kinds of qualities. And so I'm really proud of the book and proud of her work. It's really the culmination of her work in grief, which is how she's healed. So I did a
Hmm.
therapy approach. She did an arts approach, and of course for her also meant becoming a writer,
Hmm.
which is another art form. So good on us for coming up with two different ways to deal with this, with these tragedies.
Well, good on both of you for not only finding ways to deal with the tragedies, but finding ways to help other people deal with the tragedies and challenges that they experience in their own life.
Thank you.
I think that is the perfect way to describe turning an adversity into some type of a success in life. And that's why I say you walk your talk when it comes to this stuff. So
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it.
thank you so much, Richard, for being here with us today. I really, really appreciate the conversation, the candor, the tools. I'm already thinking about how I can get better at delegating and holding people accountable so I don't have to be so damn responsible.
Way to
I
go.
need
Way
to
to
move
go.
my empathy up the ladder a little bit too, though.
Yes. Yes. That's
But
great.
yeah, it has been great seeing you. And for those of you listening, you can find the show notes to Richard's website, the resilience tools that he mentioned, his books, as well as Sheila's book, all in the show notes. And I hope that you found this valuable. And I hope that if there's something going on in your life right now, I'm going to use something that Deepak Chopra said. years ago. I believe it was when the Sandy Hook shootings occurred. He said, "Don't bless and obsess, bless and let go, like bless and release." And I
Mhm.
think that a lot of times, if you want to be resilient, you cannot allow yourself to ruminate over and over and over again. You need to make that choice to surround yourself with people that are going to lift you up and do the things that are going to get you out of the situation that you're in. So, thank you very much, Richard. It was great having you here. And hopefully, our paths will cross again in real life soon.
I hope so as well, Lisa. Thank you so much. It was great being with you.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you again next time.